Hello, Miss King here, and in this screencast we're going to review some basic chemistry. So let's start simple with atoms. Atoms are the basic unit of matter, which is anything that has mass and takes up space. Subatomic particles are the parts that make up atoms. So in the nucleus, or the center portion of an atom, we will have protons, which are positive, and neutrons, which are neutral, meaning they have no charge. And then in this outer region, we have what's called the electron cloud, and this is where we find the electrons, which are our negative particles. Now, elements are substances that are made up of only one kind of atom, and when we study biology, we're going to look specifically at some very important elements that make up most of the compounds and molecules in our body. Specifically, carbon is the main, very important element in living things, but we also have lots of nitrogen, oxygen, and hydrogen as well. When we take two or more different elements, then we can combine them together chemically to make what we call a compound. So an example of a compound would be water. Water is 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. And so when we combine those two together, we get a new substance called water. And we're actually going to look at some specific important things about water in just a minute. So what holds the elements, the hydrogen and the oxygen, what holds those elements together to form that compound? Chemical bonds. So there are a lot of different kinds of chemical bonds. We're going to study 3 different kinds in biology. The first type of chemical bond that we're going to look at is called a covalent bond. Covalent bonds are where we share electrons, so we're not losing an electron or gaining an electron, we're just going to share it. We find the covalent bonds in compounds such as sugars and fats and proteins, and those are the compounds that actually make up your body parts. We also will see some ionic bonds. Ionic bonds form because they're attracted to an ion of an opposite charge. So, for example, sodium chloride, this is table salt. Whenever sodium loses an electron, it makes a positive charge. Whenever chlorine gains an electron, it makes a negative charge, and that negative is attracted to that positive, so those two elements will stick together and form a new compound called salt. And the third type of bond that we're going to see is called a hydrogen bond, and hydrogen bonds are very weak bonds, and they're usually formed between water molecules. So the oxygen of one water molecule would be attracted to the hydrogen of another water molecule, and we'll see that in a little bit more detail in just a few minutes. Now, to form these chemical bonds, we would need to have some kind of chemical reaction. This is a process where we can change one set of chemicals into a different set. This will always involve bonds of some kind. And in living things, chemical reactions are called metabolism. So when you hear that word metabolism and you think about, I have a fast metabolism or a slow metabolism, that's actually referring to how fast those chemical reactions or how slow they are in your body. An example of metabolism in plants is photosynthesis. This is actually a chemical reaction that occurs in plants to let them make food. So a plant can take some carbon dioxide from the air and some water from the ground, a little bit of energy from the sun, and it can change these compounds into sugar, or what we call glucose, C6H12O6, and some oxygen molecules. So what we've done is we've taken 2 compounds and we've converted them into 2 different compounds. Now, on the tail end of the arrow here, these first ingredients, what we call ingredients, these are called reactants. These are the things that are going to enter into the chemical reaction. On the front end of the arrow, we have what we call our products. So this is actually what we're making in our chemical reaction. Now, we need to take a look at water. Water is a survival need that all living things cannot live without. The maximum amount of time you can go without water is about 48 hours, about 2 days. After 2 days, your body will go into shock and you could very well die without having any water. So let's take a look at why that's so important. What makes water so spectacular? There's a few things. First, let's take a look at the structure of water. Let's make a drawing of a water molecule. So what I have here on the screen is an oxygen atom, and I've drawn the electron cloud. It should have 2 levels around the oxygen, and then 2 hydrogen atoms because water is H2O. Let me turn my pen on. Now, we know that the hydrogen is bonded to the oxygen. So I'm going to draw in a couple of straight lines here between my hydrogen and my oxygen to represent my covalent bond. So let's label that a covalent bond. Okay, so that means that they're sharing electrons. So hydrogen's atomic number is 1, so that means that there's 1 electron on each hydrogen. And oxygen is 8. So in our first electron cloud, we should have 2 electrons, and then we should have 6 evenly spaced electrons on our oxygen. Okay, kind of like that. All right, now, one of the things that makes water very special is that it is polar. What that means is because of its shape, it has that sort of bent shape. And when I say bent, I mean most people would think water as being kind of something like this, H2O. But actually the correct way to write it is this sort of bent shape. We have to bend those hydrogens down like that. And that's what this picture is showing here. Also, because of that bent shape, that's going to give our hydrogens over here a slightly positive charge, and our oxygen will have a slightly negative charge. And because of these positive and negative charges, that is why we call water polar. That polarity also gives water the ability to do the hydrogen bond. So that negative and that positive charge is what causes our water to be attracted. So that's where our hydrogen bond comes into play. This is a whole water molecule, and it's attracted to this whole other water molecule, and that's where our hydrogen bonds come into play. So let's take a look at how this actually works. Okay, so here's our water molecule again with our electrons, and we said that this is a covalent bond that occurs between the hydrogen and the oxygen. So there's not really a line there between those atoms. What's happening is our electrons from our hydrogens, so let's put our electrons over here. What's actually happening is they're sharing the electrons. So the electron goes around the hydrogen, and then it comes up here and it goes around the oxygen. And then it comes back and it goes around the hydrogen. And then it goes around the oxygen. And it keeps doing that over and over and over again forever as long as that water exists. So what causes the bent shape and the polarity is, see how small our hydrogen is? So this electron can make it around our hydrogen really fast. And then it's going to leave the hydrogen. So now this hydrogen over here doesn't have an electron, so it's going to have a slightly positive charge, but only while the electron is going around our oxygen. And you'll notice that we also have an extra electron around our oxygen as long as it's going around the oxygen. Okay, so it's going to keep doing that over and over and over again. This one over here is doing it at the same time. Okay, and so because our electron spends more time around our oxygen and less time around our hydrogen, that's where we get our negative and our positive. Okay, so if we were to practice drawing in some hydrogen bonds between our water molecules, we know that the oxygen is slightly positive, or excuse me, slightly negative. I put that in the wrong place. Sorry about that. All right, let's fix that. Okay, our oxygen is slightly negative and our hydrogens are both slightly positive. There we go. So we can draw in some hydrogen bonds. So our hydrogen will be attracted to our oxygen. And over here, this hydrogen will be attracted to this oxygen. And this hydrogen will be attracted to this oxygen. And so on. And we could keep doing these as long as we have water molecules that are close together. Okay, and this is what also gives water some of its fluidity, or the ability for it to move around so freely, like it can just flow through your fingers. Okay, and we could sit here all day and draw in hydrogen bonds, but this is how water sticks together. This is how it works. Okay, so another reason why water is so important is because of these two terms, cohesion and adhesion. In living things, cohesion is the attraction between molecules of the same substance. Co means together. Adhesion is the attraction of molecules between different substances. So I have two pictures up here. This picture of the leaf with the water bubbles, you can see that the water is literally bubbled up on the leaf. So how come the water doesn't fall down and spill off the leaf? Well, it's attracted to itself. So that's where we get the ability, the water gets its ability to form these sort of bubbles. Also with adhesion, you can see right here on the branch that the water is just hanging upside down. So how come the water doesn't just fall off of the stem? Well, the reason is because those water molecules are attracted to the molecules that make up the stem of whatever this looks like, a rose stem. So those are different molecules that are attracted to each other. Now, cohesion and adhesion are really important in living things because of this special thing called capillary action. And in capillary action, this is something that occurs in plants specifically. It also occurs in your body, in your blood vessels. But plants, I'm going to draw a picture of a tree. And we know that, let me change to green. We know that in, there we go. In plants, there are roots down here in the ground. So we'll call these tree roots. Okay, you can even label that if you need to. Roots. There we go. Now, when it rains outside, the water comes down and it hits the ground. And under the ground, you have what we call groundwater. So the water is going to go into the root and it's going to travel up the tree. Now, that's going against gravity. So how does the water get from way down here under the ground in the roots all the way to up here in the leaves where photosynthesis occurs? And that's where we need our water. So the answer is the water is going to rise up through the parts of the tree using cohesion and adhesion. Okay, when cohesion and adhesion work together, that's where we get this term we call capillary action. So literally, the water is attracted to itself, and it's also attracted to the parts of the tree, and so that allows it to climb up, up, up until it gets to the leaves, which is where it wants to go. So capillary action is really important in living things, especially in plants. Now, water is also important because of mixtures. A mixture is two substances that are physically mixed together. They're not chemically combined, but they are mixed together. And there are two types of mixtures, solutions and suspensions. So let's look at solutions first. Solutions are mixtures where one or more substances, or what we call solutes, are distributed evenly in another substance, which we call the solvent. And water is actually the universal solvent. So basically something is going to dissolve in something else. A good example of a solution that we all know is Kool-Aid. So in Kool-Aid, water is going to be our solvent, and the powder or the sugar is going to be our solute. So that powder and sugar is going to dissolve in the water, and that's what's going to make our solution. A suspension is a type of mixture where the materials or the solvents, the solutes, will not dissolve in the solvent. And blood is a good example of a suspension. So what we have at the top here is our solvent, our water, and some electrolytes, some different substances, but water is the main ingredient. And then down here at the bottom, we have our cells. And we don't want our cells to dissolve. So literally, they're just kind of floating around in the plasma. This is the water part, the plasma. So another example of a suspension, if we were to take a beaker and put some water in the beaker and then drop a few rocks down in the beaker, those rocks are not going to dissolve. They're just going to sit in the water. So that would be a suspension. pH is also very important to living things, and it does involve hydrogen ions in water. So we basically use pH as a measurement system to tell us how many hydrogen ions we have in a solution. When we eat food, a lot of those foods can change our pH in our body. It can make it acidic or it can make it basic. Especially things like fruits, and vinegar is another one. Like to have those on our sub sandwiches and things like that. Those are very acidic, so whenever we eat those foods, it can bring the pH in our body down to an acidic level. There are some neutral substances like water and milk, blood. These are some things that we want to stay not acidic and not basic, but neutral. And then we have some basic substances, and these substances are usually things we clean with, baking soda, soap, like when you get in the shower, and ammonia we clean the toilets and the showers with. So those are some basic solutions. That means that their pH is above 7. So just to reiterate, acids would have a high concentration of hydrogen ions, and their pH would be somewhere below 7. And bases would have a low concentration of hydrogen ions, so their pH would be higher than 7. So this is our pH scale, goes from 1 to 14. All right, so those are some really important aspects of about water for living things. So kind of soak in the information that we've been through, and if you have any questions, make sure you bring those with you to class.